As the elder statesman of the infamous hypercarry archetype, Master Yi is a household name both in and out of League's community, being one of the most recognizable champions in the game in no small part due to his extensive legacy dating all the way back to the first 40 characters to be released. He was, and still is, a champion known for demolishing entire fights on his own with his extraordinary DPS and combat mobility, easily outdueling the vast majority of the competition, and developing an infamous reputation for being one of the few who can unironically 1v9 games. At this point, if you were to ask someone to mention a hypercarry without thinking, he would be the first one to pop up for one reason or another. All the same, it's no surprise that most players' opinions of him lean more in favor of negative than positive, as evident by the stereotypes brought on by his kind of gameplay expectation. So for today's episode of Everything Wrong With, we're gonna go through the Wuju Bladesman and elaborate on why he's so problematic despite having a relatively straightforward playstyle. Contrasting Cassante, Pike, and Akshan, who are ambitious albeit cavalier attempts at hybridizing different classes, Master Yi is very loyal to his subclass of choice, Skirmisher. The Skirmisher archetype is a subset of the Slayer class, known for equal parts high mobility and single target damage output, whether sustained or front-loaded. While assassins generally specialize in high mobility, high burst damage, Skirmishers prioritize extreme sustained damage to tear through any type of opponent, whether it's Squishy Soraka or a 10,000 HP Scion, making them among the most feared opponents to cross paths with in a 1v1 setting. Skirmishers are also characterized by having non-traditional defensive tools that can make them deceptively resilient if used correctly, often being circumstantially applicable and not as universal as conventional bolt that you would see on a tank or a juggernaut. Finally, despite their high combat mobility and rushdown motif, Skirmishers tend to be the most vulnerable to peel, as they have a hard time re-engaging from a far distance after they've been disengaged from. Additionally, they have a hard time fighting when outnumbered compared to more AoE classes like Juggernauts or Battle Mages. Suffice to say, Skirmishers are excellent in 1v1 scenarios, and they function at their best when isolating a target at a time. Master Yi epitomizes the archetype in every which way you can imagine, only he takes things to the utmost extreme. His staggering single target pressure comes in the form of double strike and Wuju style, allowing him to basically attack twice every third auto or 2 with Rage Blade, and when paired with this ability to deal bonus true damage on hit, you're staring down someone who could possibly be in the top 5 when it comes to DPS. True damage also makes it so armor is far less effective against him than the likes of Riven, Tryndamere, or Yasuo, and he can also apply that true damage with his Alpha Strike. His combat mobility is indicated by Alpha Strike and Highlander, the former being a mid-range point-and-click blink that renders him untargetable for roughly a second before appearing near the target location. This can make peeling Master Yi off whoever he's attacking a bit more tricky than other skirmishers, as when timed correctly, he can both gap close in on you while dodging whatever defensive option you might use to do so, such as a Morgana Binding, Assault, or Alistar Headbutt. On top of that, Highlander gives him bonus movement speed while making him ignore unit collision and be immune to slows and cripples, which means champions who rely on kiting via slows, such as anyone with Rylai's, has basically no hope of stopping Yi. The slow immunity also makes it more tricky to get him off of you once he does get in range. Regarding situational defensive tools, Master Yi's couldn't be any more synonymous with that. As mentioned just now, Alpha Strike's generous untargetability window can allow him to dodge critical abilities from the opponent, even point-and-click ones. For example, if Rek'Sai uses Void Rush to chase after Yi, by casting Alpha Strike he can both attack her while avoiding the execute damage completely, so it doesn't even have to be skill shots. Alongside Alpha Strike, he comes equipped with Meditate, an active channel that regenerates a huge amount of health over time while still maintaining around 50% mitigation for the remainder of the channel. Once more, when timed correctly, he can face tank otherwise fatal attacks, such as the entirety of Syndra Ultimate, Lucian's Culling, or Heavy Burst attack using that 90% reduction at the start, provided he's not stunned out of it, of course. Contrary to popular belief, playing Master Yi takes, well, if it wasn't obvious from his name being a play on the word, mastery, a fair bit of it. At a surface glance, his gameplay is very straightforward. He just runs towards the target of interest and hacks away at them until they die. But how he does it is more nuanced than that of other run at you and kill you champions like Tryndamere. Alpha Strike dodging an important ability, Meditate blocking a significant amount of damage, stalling for time, or more commonly resetting his basic attack, and using Highlander when you know you can score a takedown in 7 seconds. That's why there's such a disparity between a good Master Yi player and a bad one. So what allows him to be more fitting of the hypercarry archetype than other melee attackers, and when many would attribute the frustration of dealing with him, is as a result of Highlander. On top of gaining a 7-second extension with every champion takedown, meaning his ultimate can theoretically last 42 seconds in totality, passively scoring a takedown on a champion also reduces the current cooldowns of his basic abilities by 70%, which isn't a full reset, but it enables him to continue fighting without any loss of uptime. Uptime is a huge factor of champion pressure, if not the most important factor. When talking about any champion, especially in matchups, it's practically assured for someone to say wait for them to burn their Q, or this champion's ultimate has a very long cooldown so if they waste it then be more aggressive, or something of the sort. Those pieces of advice tie back to champion uptime, the moments in a fight when they're at their most dangerous. Second only to marksmen, skirmishers are known for being incredibly difficult to take down due to almost always being a threat, either from having very low cooldowns or not having to rely too heavily on a specific ability for their pressure. Yasuo and Yone, for instance, definitely rely on their ultimates for the bulk of their all-in, but even after they exhaust it, their DPS barely takes a hit thanks to their Q spamming and naturally high auto attack damage. The only time you can realistically expect them to not be a threat is when they're flat out dead. Once again, Master Yi takes the notion of uptime to the utmost extreme. Even though no small amount of his pressure stems from having Highlander active, you still have to view him as a walking chainsaw who can easily shred you to pieces if you fail to execute him before he gets going. The 70% cooldown reduction always being in effect further exacerbates this issue since Prevailing Wisdom expects a champion to be at their most vulnerable right after they scored a kill on a target in light of all their abilities being on cooldown. Not true for Yi. Technically, he still has to wait out the other 30%, but Alpha Strike's property of having his cooldown reduced by 1 second with every basic attack on hit makes it so he just has to attack 1 or 2 times and his Q is basically back up online. Considering Alpha Strike is not only a gap closer but allows him to dodge abilities, it's a terrifying ability to have a reset mechanic attached to. Though not as endemic to just him anymore, what with there being tons of pentakill 1v9 champions in the modern age, next to Katarina, Yi was the original pentakill champion for this very reason. A key weakness of skirmishers is that any low cooldown gap closer is usually very short in effective range, such as Fiora, Riven, Gwen, and whatnot, while any long range gap closer has a measurably higher cooldown like Jax and Yone. Exceptions apply, of course. It feels like Tryndamere and Sylas can chase you to the ends of the earth with their abysmally short dash cooldowns, but point being, seldom does a skirmisher's dash ability have both a short cooldown and good range. Master Yi is one exception. It doesn't matter if your team tries to run after he gets a kill on a teammate. He will catch you and destroy you, no questions asked. So your only real option against a Yi who's getting the ball rolling is to stand and fight, even though that's exactly what he wants you to do. All of these factors culminate to one simple aspect that summarizes everything wrong with this champion. He has the best advantage state in the game. I know the word best can be subjective, after all we have other hyper advantage state champs like Samira, Viego, Bel'Veth and whatnot, but I'm referring more conceptually, not in terms of balance. Yi's entire moveset was crafted around total advantage state, meaning he's at his best when on the offensive. To keep things fair, they compromised in other areas, namely giving him a legitimately non-existent neutral and disadvantage state. The champions I mentioned before, Samira, Viego, and Bel'Veth have some semblance of a neutral and/or disadvantage. Bel'Veth can use her dashes to run away from pursuers while using W to knock up and slow enemies as she escapes. Viego can use Herald Path to speed himself away from them. Spectral Maul can also dash away, or in a pinch he can use Heartbreaker to get himself over a wall and out of harm's way. Samira doesn't really have the means to shake off assailants, but Blade Whirl can be a situational bailout for any projectile engage tool like an Ash Arrow, and being a ranged champion she naturally has a better neutral game. She can safely farm from a distance and auto with Q. Master Yi pretty much has no disadvantage state or neutral game, which is why I find myself comparing the newest champion Briar to him, but even Briar can use Chilling Scream as a get off me tool. An unreliable one, but anything is better than nothing. Neutral wise, Yi does have incredible sustain. Depending on how low your health is, even a rank 1 meditate can regenerate like half your total health if you have the mana cost to pay for it. Granted, as a jungler, there's not much need for a neutral game since you're not constantly interacting with the lane opponent, but say you got chunked by a couple Xerath or Ezreal Qs, you can back away, press W, and regain all the health back. So I guess defensively Master Yi's endurance is a degree above the rest of his peers. Everywhere else though, he sucks. Unless you use Q on a minion that's about to die that the enemy champion just so happens to be close to, Alpha Strike cannot be used as a poke tool. All of his other abilities revolve around auto-attacking and being a melee champion. If you basic attack, you're automatically in range of any offensive ability conceivable. This is why he can never be a lane champion, he has no neutral game. Disadvantage is equally hard to vouch for. Technically, Alpha Strike has uses for escape, such as queuing an enemy minion that you're running towards to put distance between you and a pursuer, or doing what Thresh sometimes does, that is throwing a hook or in Yi's case Q at a Gromp or Krug just to dash to it to run away. But being a targeted dash as opposed to free target greatly limits the number of ways it can be used in favor of more guaranteed results. Furthermore, unlike Jax's Leap Strike or Katarina's Shunpo, Yi can't use Alpha Strike on a ward or allied minion, further decreasing the ways it can be used to get out of a bad situation. Building off of that, while Meditate is one of the more effective stance type abilities by virtue of a staggering 90% damage mitigation outright, it's offset by having no offensive or defensive effect. It may as well be a roundabout Zhonya's Hourglass that can last longer but be interrupted. All Meditate can do in disadvantage is stall for time. The only thing he can tap into when caught with his pants down is to use Highlander's speed boost and slow immunity to physically just run away, but I mean at that point you might as well say Garen's Q movement speed is an escape tool. Regardless, it's very clear that Master Yi's designed to myrtleize the enemy team or die trying, which explains why you rarely ever see one perform at an average level. They either go 20 kills before 20 minutes or spend the entire game being a glorified cannon minion, super minion if we're being charitable. Consequently, that makes Yi a very selfish and uncompromising champion to have on your team as well. With no hard crowd control or even soft crowd control to speak of, all he brings to the table is damage. You can never have too much damage if your team is winning, but if your team is losing, with no team utility whatsoever, not even a stun or a ranged projectile, you're literally unironically just a glorified cannon minion. Bel'Veth can use W to be a stun bot, Fiora can use her Plus to parry enemy crowd control and reflect it right back at them while using Grand Challenge to create a healing zone. Riven can throw herself at the enemy team and try to hard CC everyone before she explodes. Jax can be a stun bot, Gwen can at least chuck her ultimate for some save damage. Sylas can jack an enemy Malphite, Nautilus can an ultimate and be a CC bot, Cassante can stick to being a tank. Tryndamere can ignore death for 5 seconds, which forces the enemy team to have to worry about him for at least 5 seconds no matter how far behind he is. If Kayn is red, he can be a stun bot or frontline. Lilia can 5-man sleep. Yone and Yasuo will always be useful thanks to their crowd control and the latter's utility. Virtually every skirmisher in the game has something to fall back on if things go south for them. If it's not crowd control or utility, it can even just be guaranteed damage. Master Yi has no utility, no crowd control, and no guaranteed safe damage. There is nothing he can do but pray the enemy team plays team fights with skirmishes incorrectly. The issue is they can't give him any concessions because of just how polarizing that advantage state is. Looking back at time at moments where Yi was an absolute menace to society. I know there was AP Master Yi back then, but more recently we had the gold funneling strategy with Taric mid. There is nothing more terrifying than an enchanter or warden supporting Yi. One might think tank supports like Alistar or Leona are best for Yi since they can lock down his first victim to start the snowball, which is valuable mind you, but supports who can supplement his disadvantage state are even more terrifying. Ivern, Lulu, Taric, Yuumi, Morgana, Renata, these are champions designed to mitigate the enemy team's advantage state. Taking into account the most surefire way to stop Yi being to burst him down before he gets it going, those champions are perfect for him. Theoretically, he can build Bruiser to keep himself alive a bit more, such as going randomins and whatnot, but he needs at minimum 3 attack items, and before he gets them, he's extremely vulnerable. So anyone who can make up for his disadvantage or lack thereof demonstrates exactly why they can't afford to give him any privileges in that department. He's just so overwhelmingly oppressive when things go well for him that they have to make it equally as punishing when things go terribly for him, leading to the paragon of hypercarry feast or famine. You feast or you starve. There's no middle ground. The reason I chose Yi for this series, despite far from being on anyone's list of top 5 most annoying, is that he's a negative experience for both the opposing team and his team more than a positive one. You could argue Evelyn's a bitch and a half to deal with as an opponent, but that's counterbalanced by the hilarity of watching her smoke the enemy team when she's on your side. Vice versa, a champion like Yasuo makes you cringe whenever he's on your team since you know for a fact he's gonna die a million times, but you can also bet on him doing the same for the enemy team as well. Although for some inexplicable reason, the enemy team always seems to get the good Yasuos while I get the bad ones. I'm not sure why. Master Yi on the other hand is generally disliked no matter whose side he's on, and only rarely do you have a positive experience with him getting 50 kills and 1v9ing the game. He does nothing to contribute to a cohesive team, so you essentially have to play and build your composition around him, or play for yourself and just pick a god and pray that he won't go 0-5 before the first dragon even spawns. Part of me thinks he's necessary to have in the game since he's one of the more straightforward hypercarries, and we do need at least one straightforward representative of every archetype. But experientially, I think it's appropriate to include him in this series, and that's why I did. Anyways, we're gonna end things off here. Let me know in the comments down below whether you agree or disagree with my points, as well as your own thoughts on Yi. But as always, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you gave this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Everything Wrong With episodes if you haven't yet. For now though, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon in the next one. Take care.